Hello and welcome to the IdeaCast interview series, episode number 104. My guest in this episode is Martin Schoendorfer, and I enjoyed having this conversation with Martin because he is able to harness his innate faculties or capabilities as a mediator and a mentor, and he is currently a certified life coach, also an actor. And I enjoy talking to people in theater arts because they have a unique perspective on character and persona and the second order of observer, if you will. And so we had a really good conversation. We covered things about mental health, about theater arts, about his coaching and what he does. And so I very much enjoyed his company, and I hope you enjoy our conversation as well. Thank you. I'd like to welcome Martin Schoendorfer to the IdeaCast interview series. Excuse me. I'm looking forward to a conversation about improving ourselves, moving forward in our lives, getting unstuck in our lives. And Martin, I'm looking forward to speaking to you because, and I hate to do this, but like you're a younger guy and I'm middle-aged, and so I'm always curious about what's going on in the collective mind of people who are coming up into a, more mature adulthood. So I'm looking forward to extracting that from you, as well as just your life experience and how you've converted that into a means to helping others. So welcome, Martin. Glad to have you.
Thank you so much, Justin. I'm very happy to be here as well and looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a nice conversation because I always research my guests, and I felt really at ease with listening to what you have to say and your ideas. And so, yeah, I think we're going to have a great conversation. I'd like to welcome the YouTube audience as well. Thank you guys for joining us in this conversation. I hope you all extract some meaningful information and ideas from this as well. So, Martin, I think perhaps in a traditional sense of getting a conversation going, or a traditional means of getting a conversation going, let's find out about you historically, your background, what led you to do the work that you're presently doing. So if you wouldn't mind unpacking some of that for us.
Absolutely. So originally I'm from Austria, grew up there and spent the first 20 years of my life in a very small town, basically. And it was a very interesting experience growing up because it's completely different to what I'm experiencing now that I'm in Berlin. Throughout my journey, I've spent 6 years in the US, 7 years in Berlin. So it's been different environments that I've seen myself in. And I have a background in quite a few different things. So I kind of call myself a multi-potentialite. It's a phrase that I came across from a book by Emily Wapnick, How to Be Everything. And it's kind of like partially why I'm here today, as well as doing my coaching business, because early on in my life, I was a drummer for about 12 years. I was a professional athlete in European handball for 10 years. Then I was an actor, I was in the military, and I did a lot of different jobs to also support myself in my lifestyle, especially when diving into the field of arts as an actor. It's been quite an interesting journey to where I am today. And throughout all those experiences, there was always that question lingering, kind of like, what am I here for? What is life about? What's that whole thing called life? And what is really my purpose here? And what I've done throughout the past 10 years was I really dived deep into self-development. And it started kind of earlier than 10 years ago, actually, when I was a mentor and mediator in high school, where I supported young kids my age and younger in the first couple of years of their journey in a new school. And I was their go-to person when they had issues, when they had kind of like, they needed someone to talk to. But in that age, during that time, it's kind of like, what do grown-ups understand about what I'm going through? So the school offered a peer to really support them in that phase when they were struggling. And that way they could have someone who's their age who, yeah, supposedly understands more what they're going through than maybe someone different age. So you mentioned that in the beginning as well, like the age difference and coming from like a different background as well. I always say it's not the like light or experience does not, it's not the equivalent to the time we spent here on the planet. So there's a lot of people I've met throughout my life who were barely teenagers, but they had such an immense life experience through what they've been through. And then I've met people who were 80, 90, and it seemed like their experience is very limited because they never got out of their comfort zone. They never got out of their environment where they grew up. So in the end, what really influenced me to become a coach was all those life experiences that I've made. And I made it my mission to support people to navigate through life, to find really meaning in what they're doing and create a vision and a self-image that they can really be proud of and say, this is why I'm here on this planet, and I'm having fun navigating through all the ups, all the downs, and the in-between that life has to give us.
I really love the point you made just a second ago about someone who's in the twilight of their life. And I was getting two things from that their richness of experience or their wisdom perhaps is shunted or not fully expressing itself or just not there. And it led me to think that, well, yeah, somebody may have led a life where they were not adventurous, they did not seek out relationship with the world or with other people, but also that had they even been exposed to the world and other people, that they're embodying that and embedding that in their minds and their way of reciprocating it back to other people. Just got me thinking. It's like, oh my gosh, there's you could live a cloistered life where you don't really get much exposure, but you could also have lived a life where you were given a lot of exposure, but then it's not being related back or it's not being processed internally. So thank you for that, because I've never really thought of it that way before. But you're right. There are kids who are sometimes in negative circumstances, living very intense lives at an early age. And I also like that idea that it can go too far, but that a little bit of adversity, a little bit of challenging at different stages in our lives can produce a person who is wise. So again, a child who comes through an adverse childhood, if they're not destroyed by that they become wise beyond their years. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. I want to unpack a few things about you and your life, and we'll do it steps at a time. And more generally, I love a comment that you made. I watched an interview that you had done with, can't remember the name of the podcast. It was a YouTube interview, but one thing you said that stood out to me that I think transcends all age groups and generations is the idea of a particularly healthy expression of selfishness, or an expression of taking care of self so that you can be available to take care of others. Let's talk about that, because you made that comment in an interview. I just want to get out of the gate with that one before I forget it. So let's talk about that, because there's obviously, I think, a spectrum of selfishness. So you can be a doormat or you can be a flaming narcissist, and there's a lot in between there. So can we unpack that a little bit and talk about it?
Sure, definitely. So my concept behind what you just shared is there's in our society, there's this thing about putting yourself first that has a very negative kind of perspective in that sense. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I grew up that way, and I think most people have experienced it at least once in their lives, where it's like, well, don't be so selfish, don't focus on yourself, make sure that that you help other people. And while all of that may be true, it's still important to look at where is that coming from and what is also the result of it. And where I really started to implement it in my own life is through experience I had first of all, in a relationship with a narcissist, where I put the other person first, and I always I didn't see my own self-worth. My self-love was not really where it is today. And I always thought I needed to be there for the other person more than for myself. And from the other side, I didn't get what I needed. And in the end, it was all about manipulation and mental abuse, emotional abuse. And I was like, that cannot be it. That's not love. That's not real connection. And also different experiences with people who always put other people first. And in the end, they suffered. And I was like, okay, let's look deeper into that. What is that, like self-love, being like egocentric or focused on the self from a more negative aspect or perspective? And what is that? What is the connection between, or where's the line in between that? And what I figured is that if we really want to be there for other people, we first need to be there for ourselves. The reason why is because if I'm not, 100% is always, I'm not sure if that's always possible, but if I'm not almost on 100% or very high with positive energy, with my attention and all that, then I cannot be there for the other person. Because if I'm in a negative kind of mood and someone else needs me, then I might not be able to listen. I might judge. I might get triggered myself. So in the end, nobody would have like a benefit. Both would kind of be there and be like, okay, what's going on with him today? And there's like a back and forth that might create some kind of conflict. And of course, sometimes it is important to not go with your negative feelings and say, you know what, I'm just going to put that aside and still support my friends or family or anyone out there. But it's all about balance as well. And if you put yourself always last, and that's usually the big issue when we always do that and always put ourselves last or even second, and we just focus on the other people, what happens so many times is that we first of all lose ourselves in the process, but also we start depending on other people to let us be there. And if those people don't let us be there because they're like, well, I don't need you right now, then it also starts an internal conflict, and we might not, or we do not get what we need. And then in the end, we will not feel good either. So it's also that dependency on other people to be able to be there for them. So if we put the focus on ourselves and be like, well, if I feel good and then someone needs me, I can be there for them, but I don't have to kind of go out and be like, please need me, I need you to need me. And self-love is really about looking after yourself first, because the more you love yourself, the more love you can also share.
And I really appreciate the fact that through the experience of a partner that was narcissistic, that you were able to come away with this understanding. And because I know personally, and we could speak abstractly about people who have been in relationships, and they go from one abusing narcissistic partner to the next, and the wheels never line up and click and say, oh my gosh, it was a mirroring process, but I wasn't catching the reflection. And you did that. And I think that's good for the audience, or if somebody comes to this conversation and they may be in that cycle, to just step back a moment. And so it's almost a contradiction that you have to have that self-loving capacity to have that recognition that, oh my gosh, this partner of mine was, a narcissist and I was their supply, and the mirroring wasn't working for me and I wasn't catching the impression. So I'm glad that you were able to do that, and that you recognized that in your partner, and you were able to have a healthy time for review and assessment and say, oh, okay, I get this. And that's what I love about this idea of a balanced, healthy Yeah, selfishness is a good word, but maybe self care or consideration could also be said to speak to that, maybe.
Totally. And I think that the huge difference between the being a narcissist and being a self-loving person is if we really look at the outcome. If I'm self-loving and I put myself first, it's not because I want to hurt someone. It's not because I don't care about them, but I care so much about you that if I cannot be there for you, then I won't, because I respect your time, I respect your love, and I want to be there for you the best way I can. And if in this moment I cannot, I wouldn't be able to serve you in this way.
Mm.
Whereas with being narcissistic, it's like, I don't give a flying, you know what, about you. I just use you the way I need you to, so that I can get what I need. And in the end, if you are broken, if you are sad or frustrated, angry, whatever, I don't care, because I got out of you what I needed, and it's all about me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's for me the big differentiation between being narcissistic and being self-loving.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. And again, that's great for the audience if you're in some stage of this type of relationship and issues and when I say relationship, internal relationship in loving yourself, that you catch that and recognize what you just said, that, narcissism is born of deep insecurity that is compensated for by this predatory sociopathic kind of consumption and objectification, which, I'm so sorry for anybody that has to live that way. But anyway, that's, how we all, learn and move through life. But I'd like to back up a little bit now. I wanted to get that out in the fore because we have this kind of golden hour of attention with audience retention and things. I thought that was such a key thing that I heard in another conversation. So thank you for sharing those insights. So let's back up a little bit. And you have this multiplicity of experience and life history that brought you to a point where you wanted to work with others, to reach out to others. You want to use the discipline of your theater arts skills, which I want to talk up to later. But where did you have that kind of aha moment, or what period of your life did you have this kind of aha moment to say, I can be of value to others and sort of pass these ideas, these kernels of wisdom along? Was there a key moment, or was it subtle? Did it take time?
A key moment, I'm not sure if it was a key moment, but it was definitely different experiences that led up to that point.
Okay.
Because first, what I shared before with being a mentor and mediator for kids was kind of like the first experience for me on that level. But nobody back then told me this was something that you can do for a living. This is nothing like a career or anything. So it was never on my mind that I could do this for the rest of my life. Same with acting. Nobody told me I could be an actor until I decided, hey, I want to try this out. I want to see what this is all about. And I went for it. So, and also throughout my whole youth, somehow people always came up to me and be like, hey, Martin, can you help me? Like, you're so good with advice. You're so good with conflict solving. And I'm like, sure. I mean, I have my own issues, but, if you think that I can support you, sure. And then especially when I moved to New York to study acting, the first thing I heard when I moved to New York, I think was the first day, someone told me, this city is going to push you down. It's going to lift you up. It's going to push you down, lift you up until you found yourself. And I'm like, I know myself. That's not going to happen. Well, little did I know that I knew little about myself. And this really happened. I crashed multiple times until I started to look at myself differently and be like, okay, who is Martin? Who is that living, breathing, physical thing that walks around? And I want to know more about myself. And it wasn't until, through acting, of course, there's such a deep process of getting to know yourself, because you're working with your experiences. And it influences my coaching style a lot, because in acting, it's really about getting to know the character, finding the similarities of the character within yourself, and then make like an authentic connection with the people that you're on stage with or in front of the camera with, but also behind the camera and the audience. It's all about that human connection. And like with self-love, it is so important to first connect to yourself, because if you cannot connect to yourself, how can you find the similarities between you and your character? You can't. And through that process also, when I then moved on to LA, I started to get into self-development. I participated myself in different workshops and seminars, and I really wanted to get to know myself more than I already knew at that point. And once I attended those workshops and seminars, I was like, hey, that reminds me of something I did back in my youth, the mentoring and mediating. And I was like, wow, this is something that you can offer. Like, this is something that is actually existing out there, where people can learn more about themselves and can really become who they are meant to be and who they want to be. And that kind of, I guess that was like that moment where that spark came back, and I was like, hey, how about I look into that, if I can make that something for myself, like my own program or my own service that I have to offer or can offer. And I immediately let go of that thought, because I was like, I have plan A. Plan A is acting. And I was like, plan B, but distract from plan A. And I was like, nope, I'm not going to do that. And then it took me a couple of years until I realized plan A for me is life. Plan A is for me to live the way that I want to be fulfilled, to be happy, but also to be able to appreciate the negative experiences. Because through negative experiences, we can learn, we can grow, we can connect. And I want to be able to experience both and not judge myself based on a negative experience. And once I shifted from that perspective, or from that kind of mindset of plan B, distraction from plan A, and say plan A is life, now within that plan A, I can do acting, but I can also do coaching, because both is supporting that plan A. And that's when I started my coaching business, and that's why I'm here today, and support other people to not do the same in that sense, but also to create their own path, their own plan A of life.
Well said, well spoken. And when you talked about going to New York and immersing yourself in the fire of the chaos and the unknown and and the hostility that can come from urban living, it reminded me of something I'd heard a couple of weeks ago. There were, I can't remember them their names, I apologize, but there were some philosophers talking about typically there's the idea that ritual leads to transcendence, and ritual can be positive, but it can also be something that is very disturbing to the normal patterns that we, want to predict for our lives. And so for shamanistic rituals and transcendent rituals, there's sleep deprivation through dancing all night, through taking psychedelics, in sort of a Neolithic sense, and also isolation, things like that just really break us out of our normal routine. When you said that about New York, it reminded me, I was like, oh, that's just another way to break out of yourself a long enough time to be in a new sort of perspectival environment. And so that spoke to me when you said that, and that's good, right? Again, that pushes you outside of the habituated self, the self that constructs itself every day as the same person. We repeat our narratives of who we are. And I love that you prioritize the ambiguity of life itself. And I say ambiguity because we don't know what life's going to produce the next frame by frame, that you can be at ease in that too. And that's sitting in the fire as well, is to say, well, I really wanted to force life into this first A, which was acting, and but life's not going to do that for you. It might show up that way, but that speaks to a sense of flexibility and agility in navigating experience, and I appreciate that. I want to go ahead. Maybe you've talked about acting. Let's talk about that a little more broadly, if we could, because that's something that really jazzes me. And when you and I were speaking in a pre-meet, I thought, oh, this is a great opportunity for me to talk to somebody. I've had another couple of actors on before and a film director. And I just love the theater arts overall as a means of sense making and meaning making. People like myself who've never been involved have the outside perspective. You have the inside perspective. And so one thing, and I'm on a tangent here, so bear with me for a second. There's a guy that I follow. He's a philosopher, and he's German. His name is Hans-Georg Moeller, and he's in China right now. He has this idea he works with called prophilicity and curation of the profile of self. And he speaks a little bit in a postmodernist sense about what we're doing with social media and how there's this abstraction of ourselves into an avatar on Twitter or X Twixter or whatever it is now, and Instagram and all these other platforms. I think acting, and this is me being naive, but I think acting is the sense of a prophilicity and curation of a profile or a character or a narrative that you do as your profession, as your craft. But we all do it sort of without knowing it, whether we're students in academia trying to, curate an identity for the sake of an academic career or any other discipline. So I'll hush for a minute because I'm on my tangent here. But let's talk about what happens in that transformative process when you go from being Martin to, what was that recurring character you had? Maxie, was it? What was your character name? I was looking at your IMDb profile. You had a string of shows where you were an alternate name, a student, a nom de plume.
I used to go by Maxi. That was my.
Was that a nom de plume or something?
It's Maximilian is my late grandfather's
that's your
name.
Okay, and that's your middle name too, isn't it?
It's unofficially, yeah. I kind
unofficially.
It's not on my
It's a good name. I like Max.
Yeah, I love the name. It's like I just connected so much to the name, and that's why I used it. But it kind of fits to what you just talked about.
So let's talk about abstracting ourselves out of what we consider to be our personality, our identity, and forging another identity. And you as an actor, or any actor, needs to do that to stay an actor. But let's relate that also to just everyday life and ordinary people who may or may not be aware that they're doing that, and how that relates to transformative process and helping people improve their lot, their situation.
So with acting, of course, like as with anything in life, there's different approaches. And the way I approached it, the way I learned it, is really to go from the inside out. There's other approaches where you first start looking at the physicality of your character, how does he move, and like all that, and talk and speak, talk and think. But with the approach that I learned is really to, first of all, as I mentioned before, look at what is the similarity of the story that's already written within the script or within the play, and look at your own life story and look at the similarities within there. And then instead of trying to do something with your body or something on the outside, really look within yourself. Like, what part of yourself can you relate to that character? What experience, like what experience where you might have found a similarity, what within that experience can you utilize to create some kind of reality? Because it's not about creating a specific emotion. That's in acting, it's a very misunderstood thing, even within people within the industry. It's like, oh, can you cry like on demand? And I'm like, no, it's not. That's not how, at least that's not how I work, It's because it's not about the crying. It's about the realness of the emotion, because we see it on TV all the time, or even we go to a play. If someone just cries or shouts, but you're like, there's something missing. It just feels like they're just doing that because they were told to do that. You don't really connect to that. when I watch a show, for example, and that happens, then I don't care about that person. I'm like, well, you're crying, but you just want to feel sorry, you know, like
Mm.
I don't connect anything with that because it's just not real. It's not authentic. And without being authentic, it's not possible to create real connections.
Mm.
So when we take that approach and we first look within ourselves and look at how do we think, how do we feel, how can we connect first to ourselves, but also then to the people around us, we can use that same concept and put it into life. Where it's, first of all, if you're having a conversation with someone, you can look at how can I relate to that person? How can I connect with that person? But looking first into yourself and figuring out, like, am I authentic? Do I even want to be in that conversation? Do I want to be in that environment right now? And in acting, you always play a role, but the role is basically like the center, the inside, basically. That's always me. That's always Martin, because that's my emotions. Everything around it are layers, and that layer is what makes the character different to who I am in real life. In real life, on the other hand, the same thing happens. We have our true essence, the being that we are. And around it are all kind of layers and the roles that we play in different aspects of life. The role of a employee or of an entrepreneur, the role of a parent, the role of a sibling, the role of a stranger walking on the street. You know, there's so many roles that we play, and we might behave different in those different roles. You might feel very confident when you're hanging out with friends, being in that role of a friend, but then someone tells you like, hey, go and approach that person and, you know, ask them on a date. And you're like, oh my God, like, I can't do that. I'm not worthy. Like, what they're going to think I'm a creep. And suddenly you can hear yourself doubting yourself, judging yourself, or judging another person. So it's, in one situation with friends, you might be very confident. In the other situation, you might not be confident. So it's also that, like, different roles, you might have a different experience of yourself. That's the same in acting. Different roles have different experiences, but in the end, the essence, the true part within that role, that's always you.
One thing I'm taking away is, and I'll clarify what I'm going to preface something here, that when I use the term performative, I don't mean it in a judgmental or a pejorative sense, but really when we distill things down, and this will come into a little personal philosophy of mine, is that we are essentially performative creatures. And there, like I think you said, there are layers and iterations of this performative nature. But when we try to really pinpoint what our true identity is, it becomes murky, perhaps, or obfuscated, in the sense that we can't, you know, can you really define your core identity? Probably, and there is an essence in there that is really us. But you know, so many iterations of performative, like you said, there is the archetypal parent role that we play, or the employee role that we play. And even there's a postmodernist guy, Sartre, who talks about that being bad faith, where you actually live the role of the waiter. You are the waiter. That is your identity. And you get lost, so not necessarily lost, but it becomes concrete, you know, very concrete part of yourself. So in coaching and in working with people, to be able to have them recognize this, that there are these different characters or perspectives or aspects of themselves, and man, we can really get lost in those. And I think that's one thing that leads to our you know, self-generated suffering, is that, you know, who are we? You know, we get this kind of hall of mirrors thing going on, where we just don't recognize ourselves. And how do we, so as an actor, and, you know, we've heard stories and they're kind of sensationalized, how a method actor might just really, you know, get messed up by the role they played. I know there was a oh, what was his name? I'm gonna forget now, my middle-aged brain, but the guy that played Jim Morrison in the Doors movie, he kind of got lost in that character for a while. And he said it got into his head because he went so far. Val Kilmer went so far deep into the character role. So I'm sort of dramatizing here, but yeah, it's just it's a scary labyrinth, right? When we really want to think about who are we, and are we authentically that archetypal role of a parent or an employee or a companion to a particular person, that we have to be a kind of different person for, you know, that we modify ourselves. So it's not a question, it's more I'm just handing that back to you, and I'm like, oh, you know, there's a lot of work there, and it's understandable that people can get lost in themselves and the multifaceted identity that we need to have. There's no judgment in that. We all have to do that. We have to be different people for different occasions.
Absolutely. One thing that that definitely falls into that as well is it's very important to look at who do you want to be compared to who do you think other people want you to be, and what might other people like or not like. Because that also happens very often in acting, where it's like, oh, how can I make this so that people laugh? Or how can I make that more dramatic and more sad so that people will start crying or whatever? I'm like, that's not what it's about. It's not about figuring out how does the audience react. It's about you making it as real as possible so that you give the audience the chance to connect if they feel that this is something that speaks to them. In life, it's the same thing. It's not about us trying to figure out what other people want from us or think about us. It's about how can I become the truest version of myself? And the people who will resonate with that version of myself on a positive level, they will come into my life experience. And those who don't like me, who don't accept that version of me, then let them go. They do not belong into your life. It's not about you adapting to someone else's wishes of who they want you to be, but it's about who do you want to be, and then trust that the right people will also find you.
Let me toss this idea to you and see what you want to do with it. When we're talking about this, my imagination got spinning a little bit, and I thought, well, if we distill away, or let's say we extract away the again, the multifaceted aspects of ourselves or parts of ourselves, it almost seems like there's an easier connection to be made with your fellow persons, fellow humanity, if we do really, again, peel back the layers, and maybe this core essence, there is a commonality or a thread amongst all of us, that, you know, we are capable of empathic expression or vulnerability, and you know, all these different sort of pro-affect or positive affect traits, these things that, you know, so kind of golden rule, we want for ourselves that we would want for others, but again, with layers of identity or layers of persona attached, that it's hard to justify the vulnerability. It's hard to justify empathy. It's hard to justify connection and communication and all these things that, again, that most people would deem to be positive or positive affect, things that are going to invoke a sense of well-being. Does that resonate with you, that, you know, if we can not necessarily deconstruct, but just be aware of what is that core essence of ourselves, and how do we even, you know, get down to that layer, that we could connect a lot more easily with other people, that there are less things in the way, less, again, trappings of the ego perhaps, or again, character roles that we are so strongly connected to. Does that make sense, that, you know, if we could pull back some of those layers, that we would find within us this commonality, this thread that I think most humans could recognize and would want to be part of our operating system, if you will?
I think in that regard, it's very important to look at who are you really compared to what kind of layers have other people put on you. because it's kind of like clothes, you know, like if I wear what I'm wearing because I chose it, because I like it, and it's part of me showing who I am, then it's one thing compared to if someone else comes along and puts like a coat on top of me and be like, yeah, that looks better, you know. Then, but if I keep that and say, yes, you're right, but if I don't really like it, then again, I'm not true to myself. And within ourselves, I think it's very similar, like with beliefs, with doubts, with thoughts that we have. It's very important to differentiate like what is really ours and what's something that people have instilled in our subconscious, kind of through parenting, through the school system, through the people that we surround ourselves with, what information we're picking up through TV or radio or the internet. And I think everything, and us human beings included, everything just is. But our ability as humans to put everything into categories, to create meaning of something, that is what in the end is also makes us, or creates kind of the ability to communicate with other people the way we do. But it depends on what kind of perspective you're putting, or what kind of filter also you're putting on it. If you're coming from a standpoint of like, it just is, and how can we experience it? But I think once we put words on it, it always goes through a filter.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Because words, it's part of the conscious part of our mind, of our brain, of our being, and it needs to go through that kind of filter to be so that we speak, even though we might not realize or recognize that filter in the moment we do it. It might just feel like, oh, we're just responding immediately, or reacting to something, but it always goes through some kind of filter. Mm-hmm. I think the real, like the realist part of ourselves, there's no words, it's just feelings. It's just a sensation within ourselves that we then, well, to the best of our knowledge, we can communicate it, but it barely ever, I think never actually, is comparable with the real experience within ourselves. So it's more about that energy, that frequency that we are on. And we don't need words, because if you go into a room and you're like, Jesus, I gotta leave. Most of us probably have experienced that before, or where you walk into a room, you're like, oh my God, like this energy in here is great, although nobody's speaking. Mm-hmm. So it's not about the words, it's not about that physical action, but it's more about that internal feeling. And if we all listen to that a little bit more, I think we can connect way differently, and the world would be a different place if we go more into our feeling part of who we are, compared to what we see, what we pick up with our senses, how we can talk and make other people understand, and explaining or trying to explain everything that's happening. Instead of doing that, just be. I mean, just be. It's easier said than done, of course.
Yeah, it's almost ineffable to try to convey that stripping down, if perhaps. And I agree, when you walk into a room, the body language and facial expressions it is language, body language and facial language. It's its own communication tool or system. And yeah, it speaks volumes. So again, if there's a crowd that, you're not connecting with, it's really palpable and you want to get out. That's a good way to put it. And then comes the added abstract verbal communication that is potent. It's very strong. But again, is there, I think the facial and the body language is a truer language. It speaks more clearly and directly than what the words would say, because the words are being filtered, like you said, through an ego, through a perspective of a particular personality that's expressing itself at the time. I think we have subtle dissociative qualities where we can unplug from a personality that we had 10 minutes ago and move into another personality. So yeah, I agree that sensing the subtle cues of body and face and so forth are a good way to start that process, because I'm now trying to think of, well, how do we get from a self, and I'll use me as an example, that is 3 layers deep of not being authentic, or 3 layers deep of being a people pleaser, or trying to be inauthentic for the sense of diplomacy or whatever. And I get lost in that. And now how do I extract myself back down into a me that I, in a sort of reciprocal way, can connect with and just feel at home in myself. I love the idea of being unhoused within yourself. And I think that speaks to this sort of being displaced from who you really are. And so for the person that is struggling with that, how do we begin that? And I guess you've touched on that, it's being able to just firstly recognize, I guess, that we're doing that. Does that sound right?
It's all about, in the beginning, the awareness and conscious awareness, because if you're not aware of what's going on, then you cannot change anything and you will not be able to understand it ultimately. So creating that awareness is truly important. And I think one of the biggest mistakes we make as humans is that we look into the past, see what happened, and then what is happening in our reality right now, and what does that mean about me? Like, who am I? Or kind of answering the question, who am I, based on who we are right now. That gets us just so far, because I believe, the way I see it, is the present moment is nothing else than just a reflection of the past. It's not the final reality in that sense. And if we just focus on the past or even the present moment, then it can very quickly become very narrow-minded in that sense, because we're just going from also a filtered version of what we're experiencing right now, how we feel, how we think in this present moment, and put so much meaning on that. And that's why when I work with people, I do go into the past. I do go into like what's happening right now, just for a way to figure out where's the starting point. Where do you go? Where do you start from? And more importantly, where do you go to? Like, what is your ultimate vision? What's your goals that you have? And also connected, very importantly, is the self-image. Who do you want to be? Because you can choose. You can, from one moment to the next, you can choose to be different. You can, or it's not, I mean, it is possible to change immediately, but usually it takes kind of like it takes practice. It takes some time to really implement that change. But you can make a decision right now to start being different in specific situations. And once you create a very clear picture of who you want to be and what you want to experience in life, then you can start adjusting yourself. Because then it's like, okay, how would that version of myself think? How would that version of myself behave? Who would that version of myself surround themselves with? And then I can see, like, okay, compared to where that version of myself, how that version would act and think and feel, compared to where I am right now, what's the difference? And what's the next thing I can do in order to get closer to that new version? Because then you can make kind of a plan of like, okay, what can I focus on next to change my thinking or my subconscious programming, my habits. And then step by step, you can develop into that version that you want to be. And that way we are unlimited, because we can be and become whoever we want to be. There's no limits to that except for our imagination. And of course, physically, there are limits. We cannot fly. We cannot, be a superhero in that sense and climb walls in a way that's just physically not possible. But we put so many limits on ourselves. And I want to encourage people to break those limits and say, hey, how can I be unlimited with what's possible physically in this physical realm and become a version that I want to be? Not taking into consideration everybody else's opinion, everybody else's judgment or limited beliefs, but who do I want to become? And what can I do and what do I have to do in order for me to grow into that?
One thing in my own experience that I've noticed, you mentioned sort of subconscious patterning, and it's real because it is our history. You know, there is the subconscious that runs all the systems of our body, but there's also what I call the obfuscated or inaccessible sort of buried histories of we can't, you know, bring to the fore everything that generated what we are today psychically or in a psychological sense. And I know for me, I run into somatic feeling when I want to change, but there is that deeply ingrained history that is the psyche, the psychology of me. And when I want to move forward or change the expression of myself, I notice there is this almost somatic resistance, a physically felt, some would call it visceral, which is like your gut, but I would say almost a whole body experience. So if I could lend that into the conversation as well, that, you know, when you are moving into uncharted territory, that you will respond physically, like we were saying a moment ago with the room and the physical language of the body and the face. You can tune yourself into that too as well, and use that as a tool to recognize when an ingrained pattern is resisting that new thing. And one other thought on that is that we were talking about you going to New York City and bam, you're in a whole new environment, and it can be hostile, it can be exciting and fun, but you know that you're taking yourself out of a predictable, habitualized routine, and that to me is another means of discovering who you're not, you know, by putting and it's not to put yourself in danger, but to put yourself in a novel experience or unfamiliar territory. And again, you'll get the somatic response. You'll be like, oh, this doesn't feel right at first, but then that's the old patterns, the old psychology that needs just a little bit of tweaking to accept. You know, one thought, and I'll keep on my tangent here for a second. One thought in cognitive science is that our framing of reality is an updating of priors. It's a calculus that if we are learning, we are updating a prior belief with new information, new experience. And so that's maybe another tool that I can offer before I hand it back to you. But just, you know, continually being open to the idea, not resisting the updating of those prior beliefs. And if we can keep that in a flow, in a fluid kind of way, which is not easy, but that's a means also to help in that transformative process. If you want to answer, speak to any of that, that's let's do that. But we're coming up on just about our hour mark. So I also want to leave room for you to talk to me about your future and what you plan to do. So do you want to respond to that sort of updating of prior beliefs, or do you want to go ahead and just move into letting us know where you're heading and what's going on with you in the future that you can at least start to predict a little bit?
Sure, I want to do both because I love the topic that you just talked about. There's like this I just remember that saying or that metaphor kind of, I don't know where it originated from, but like an ancient tribe where a boy asked, I think the grandfather tells the kid, there's two wolves within ourselves, and the one is good, one is evil, and they're fighting. And the boy asked the grandfather, like, which one wins? And the grandfather says, the one that you feed. And it's the same with the subconscious programs, you know, like if you have a negative one and you want to create a positive one, it's which one do you feed? Do you feed the negative one with negative thoughts and focusing on it and like putting all your attention on that negativity? Or do you decide and say, yes, it's there. I'm aware that it's there and I accept that it's there, but I choose to focus on the new one. I focus on the positive one. Because there's a saying like where attention where attention goes, energy flows. So depending on where you focus on, that's where the energy is flowing toward. And that's also how we can change our programming, by a conscious choice where we focus on. Because as long as we focus on the old patterns, it doesn't have to be a negative one, but if it's an old habit or old pattern, if we want to change it and upgrade it, it's important to start not focusing on it so much. Because if we focus on it, we reaffirm that belief, we reaffirm that habit. And while we focus on that, we cannot focus on the new one. Because consciously, we can only focus on one thing at a time. We can become we can be aware of multiple things, but focus, you can only focus on one thing at a time with 100% attention. So when you create new patterns or new habits, it's very important to make that choice. And first of all, or like the steps I always say, first is the awareness, then the conscious awareness, then the acceptance. If you don't accept, if you try to push away and say like, oh, this is bad, I don't want to think about that, that is usually not very, very effective, because it's going to come back. It's still going to be there. Suppressing never releases it. So you have to accept it so that you can release it as well. It's kind of like a little kid that's crying. If you just push it away and ignore it, it continues to cry. Mm-hmm. If you want to, or if you're open to understand and accept, that's when you can resolve whatever is going on. The same within ourselves. Yeah. So that is definitely a process that I do personally, but that I also work on with my clients. And
that's very, and I don't want to impose this on what you just said. For me, that's Jungian. It's not suppressing the shadow. It's dancing with the shadow, integrating a shadow, and doing for me, it would be a synthesis project, because without the shadow, without all the negativity, you wouldn't grow. You wouldn't move forward. If life was perfect, no, it would be hell. You would never evolve. You would never grow. So I just want to add that as my own personal sort of.
We wouldn't even know. We wouldn't even know, because we couldn't compare in that sense.
Yeah.
If we don't have the contrast.
Yeah, you need the union of opposites to do that. So I like that. Thank you. I agree completely that it's a teacher that shows up when we suffer, or when we have a dark history, or whatever you want to call it. It's only there to help you to grow, if you frame it that way. Like you said, you can't stuff it and shove it down. You have to frame it as being something that's useful to you, that can assist you in your transformative process. So thank you for that. Thank you. So let's speak to your future a little bit, and then we'll start to round things out for this conversation. And we can certainly have you back for another one.
I'd love to. I can't believe it's been an hour. It's
it goes by like
20 minutes, 30 minutes, but yeah. So my future, I mean, there's a lot of things that are going to happen over the next 10, 20, 30 years, but in the next few months, or in the next year, let's say, there's definitely going to be a few changes, because I've started creating workshops. They're accessible for free, so nobody has to charge to pay for anything, because for me it's also about giving back and being able to reach people who it's about figuring out like what is life about, and what is their life about. Because one thing that's really important for me is to also focus on what is the individual journey. And that's something I want to expand more and more to kind of have like a global audience as well. Because for me, it's all about community. It's about connection. It's about bringing people together from all different aspects of life, from all stages of life, from different cultures. And that's what I want to dive more and more into. And because I work in a holistic way, so I have all areas of life that I implement into my coaching. But I also want to expand on that and collaborate with people and bring, like, for example, I don't do workout routines or meditations in a bigger level. So I also want to, collaborate with people and bring people together to have a more or even more holistic approach and experience. And yeah, for me, that's one of the next things that are gonna be happening. I'm looking forward to it. And yeah, I want to continue to grow, continue to develop myself, because that's one thing that I always say. It's kind of like connecting the circle now to what we started, where we started in the beginning about self-love. In order for me to be able to support other people and to be able to create workshops or coaching programs, coaching services, is for me, it's important that I also grow myself, that I focus on my personal journey. And because through that, I can also share more of my own experience, of my own growth. It's just part of my mentality, you know. So I wouldn't feel I wouldn't be a coach in that sense. I wouldn't feel confident or comfortable teaching anything that I'm teaching, because I have like a teaching aspect, coaching aspect, mentoring aspect, consulting aspect. So depending on what people need, I switch roles within my role. And I wouldn't be able to do any of that if I wouldn't live that as well. You know, I walk my talk. I don't just say, oh, do this, you know, and wouldn't be willing to do it myself. So for me, definitely it's the self-development, the growth that I want to focus on myself as well, so I can be of even better service to people.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's critical in anybody who dares to be a transformative facilitator or coach mentor. And I say this to myself, if I try to be any kind of make any kind of impact on another life, is that I'm doing it for both of us. In the 70s, and I'm a little older, there was a guy that had this thing called the Hair Club for Men, and he had this horrible toupee on his head, and he goes, I'm not only the president of the Hair Club for Men, and he pulls his toupee off, and he goes, I'm a member, right? And I love that, because it's, okay, forget hair, but speaks to the idea that anybody who has the audacity, unless you have a PhD in neuropsychology or something, even them, they're doing it for themselves. I know a lot of people that get into psych because they're dealing with stuff and they want to discover things. And so everyone should have that humility to know that this is a co-creative process. It's a co-discovery process, and everything else process. It's not about you lording over somebody. It's about you growing by way of teaching, and teaching by way of growing, and stuff like that. So thank you for that. Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, it's so important to not get into our own hubris, because that's another personality that can come out of us that can get away from us. And we see that in cults and gurus, and these Hollywood celebrity guru types that think they have it figured out. Yeah, there's a long way to fall from that. So if we can keep and humility means to be grounded, right? So if we can ground ourselves in that humbleness of, oh my God, I'm in service to you, you're in service to me, and together we're going to grow. So I appreciate that you focus on that. So thank you, Martin. We had a wonderful conversation. This speaks exactly to the kind of messaging I want to go out into the world, and the kind of shared communication that you and I created that goes into the world. So Martin, I really want to acknowledge that, offer my gratitude to you for that, and appreciate what we created just now. And I also want to encourage you to do exactly what you just said, is to sally forth and grow and continue to be a good person to others and help them on their journeys. So thank you for that. Thank you for this conversation. Like I said, we can bring you back. I want to have a little more dialogue with you. But in the meantime, let's turn this one loose into the world and whet people's appetite for transformation and the possibilities of new expression. That's deep.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed our conversation as well. And of course, everybody who is watching this, thank you for tuning in as well. And yeah, it was a very wonderful experience talking with you.
Good. I appreciate that. And yes, to the YouTube audience, thank you. Those of you who are still watching, I always love the guys and gals and persons that hang out to the last bit of the conversation. Thank you all so much. There's contact information for Martin down below. All the relevant socials and websites will be down in the description field, so I'll make sure that you can access Martin's work that way. But again, Martin, thank you so much for your company and your time and your insights. I appreciate it, and I know I speak for the audience that this conversation will be appreciated as well. Now, I'll say goodbye to you when we're done recording, but to the YouTube folks, again, thank you all so much for your time. and we'll have another conversation with Martin down the road. So, all right, let me get the recording here.